Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Revealing What's Next from Panzura, where your files meet AI. I'm Thomas Morelli and I'll be today's moderator. Before we begin, please use the chat box to submit questions. If we do not have time to get to all your questions today, we will follow up via email. Let's begin. The topic today is Panzura Nexus, which became generally available today. If you have been watching the AI space from an enterprise seat, you already know the problems we're going to talk about today. You've bought Copilot licenses, your users are logged in, and the data that actually drives your business, that's the drawings, the contracts, the project files, the matter files, the design history, is nowhere Copilot can see it. That's the gap Panzura Nexus closes. The initial release integrates Panzura Nexus with the Panzura CloudFS hybrid cloud file system to enable intelligent conversational interactions with project files, design documents, and office documents by asking natural language questions, discovering content and context across millions of files, and extracting actionable insights. This is done through the Microsoft Copilot interface you already use, while maintaining the same security and access controls that govern your file environment. Panzura Nexus ingested content is part of the Microsoft AI ecosystem, allowing intelligent retrieval through Microsoft 365 Copilot and custom agents built in Microsoft Copilot Studio. The launch of Panzura Nexus is the first step in our strategy to integrate AI-driven intelligence across enterprise file silos and systems. The roadmap outlines expansions to other major file platforms, enabling the same real-time change capture, permission synchronization, and trusted data pipeline for Microsoft Copilot. Two people are going to walk you through this today. Mike Harvey is Senior Vice President of Products. Mike has been a driving force behind Nexus. And Darrin Chapman is Senior Director of Product Marketing. Darrin will guide our conversation. Mike and Darrin, over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. Mike, as always, it's great to be here with you. And thanks for sharing some background content for us, if you don't mind. So over the next several minutes, thank you, Mike. We're going to get into the problems and challenges that we're solving for our customers with this solution. We're calling this Nexus. But first, let's start with what we're actually hearing from our customers. For the last year or so, every conversation I've had with a customer has AI in it somewhere. So what are they actually telling you, Mike?
Darrin, they're telling us two things. First, that they've made the Copilot investment. They've made that bet. The subscription is being paid. The licenses are bought. Users are on the system. Some of them are using it every day. Some not so much. Second, the data they actually need to do their job is on the file platform. For our customers, that's CloudFS. And the problem is Copilot can't see any of it. An architect trying to ask Copilot about a set of drawings, a project manager looking for cost benchmarks from a comparable job, a lawyer trying to pull key case files. None of that works because Copilot sees SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams, and that's it.
All right, thanks, Mike. So today, prior to our Nexus solution with the Copilot integration, what do those customers actually do about that?
Three options, none of them great. Option number one, move data to SharePoint. Simple in theory, but in practice, it breaks access controls and it turns into a migration project. And compliance is going to have an issue with that for sure. If you're in AEC, legal, energy, or financial services, that's a non-starter. Option two is you could build your own. You could build your own integration to Graph, which is Microsoft's API. You can do it. It'd be a services engagement that would run, months to years potentially, depending on complexity, and then you own it forever. So a lot of custom code, custom identity mapping, that's a real maintenance burden. And we've watched customers go down this road for sure. They can get it working, and then there can be system changes, API changes, and then they're back in the repair shop. Option three, you accept that your Copilot license works on, let's say, the least valuable data that you have, and you just hope users get some benefit from searching meeting notes and what have you. And that's what most people are doing, which is why the Copilot ROI conversations can be pretty awkward.
So option 3 really does not sound like the route we want to pursue, especially with those awkward ROI conversations. Let's back up to option 2 for the minute then, the build your own graph connector option. If a customer has the engineering capacity and they go down this custom build path, what does that actually look like? On paper, at least, Microsoft has documented this API for starters.
Yeah, I mean, the API is documented, sure. The piece that's not documented is everything else around it, right? You need to write the control framework. You need to write ingestion logic. You need to write an identity mapper that takes your on-prem AD expression and produces, an Entra ID artifact that Copilot expects. You need to detect changes in the file system. How do you know a file was modified or permissions were changed? You need that change detection. What about updates? What about name changes? What about folders getting moved? You need to handle retries when graph rate limits you, for example. And you need a policy engine, so you're not indexing your whole file system. You need reporting, you need event management, you need a dashboard so your admins can see what's happening. So after all of this, you need to maintain it. Connectors change, APIs change pretty regularly these days. And don't forget, you have CloudFS on the other side, and that's going to get upgraded, right? That's going to change. And there can be AD changes. The structure of that can change with mergers and acquisitions. So all of these work together to make a maintenance challenge. And every single one of these is engineering work for the team that owns the connector. So the reality is that over time, that team will never get smaller. And we've certainly spoken to customers who have spent $500,000, let's say, building their own, who now spend about $150 to $200 a year maintaining it. And the truth is, it's a worse product than what we built here, because we've had dozens of customers stress testing this technology in different environments, and it's not a fair comparison, right? It's not a fair fight.
Thanks, Mike. Let's back up for a second. I want to discuss option 1 for a minute, where you mentioned moving the files to SharePoint, because that's the question I get more than any other question when I'm out talking to customers and prospects. Microsoft pushes the just move it over to SharePoint answer pretty hard. What do you say to a customer who's thinking about that moving their data to SharePoint?
You got to look at what you're actually moving, right? If you're an engineering firm, you've got active project folders with tens of thousands of drawings, complex permissions, links between files, tools that read from paths, all of that sort of stuff. And SharePoint's not designed for that workload, right? It's not a file system. So you'd be re-architecting how your teams work in order to make Copilot happy. And then the access control piece is real, right? Your ID groups map to project teams, disciplines, regions, customers. That structure exists for a reason. You can't rebuild it in SharePoint. Not really. I mean, if you did, then you'd have to maintain 2 access systems, 2 access control systems, 2 event management systems forever, because you cannot replace the original. And there's also a compliance dimension here, often overlooked. Most of our AEC and legal customers have data that's subject to client contracts with specific handling requirements, where the data resides, who can access it, what retention is. And those contracts are written specifically for existing infrastructure. If you move the data, you could potentially be in breach of those contracts, and nobody signs up for that.
So your expensive AI doesn't see your expensive data. And the 2 obvious ways to fix it are both worse than the problem itself. And by the way, Thomas told me to keep things moving, so I'm going to. Let's get into what Nexus actually does about all this. The next step would be, let's start at the top, at the very beginning. Let's provide a quick foundation or baseline on our solution. What is Panzura's Nexus solution, Mike?
Yeah, you can think of Nexus as a bridge between CloudFS and Copilot. It reads files, it enforces your permissions, and it makes that data AI searchable through the Copilot interface that your users, they already know. Files don't move, permissions don't change, and Copilot gets a real-time governed window into your file data.
So what I'm hearing is no movement of your data, permissions are maintained, and your data is actually searchable. Can you do me a favor and walk me through how Nexus actually works and how it achieves these key business values? And I want to be careful here. Our audience has heard AI magic a lot this year. We've heard it during the Super Bowl and everywhere else. But we want real answers here, Mike.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So let's introduce some vocabulary here, because Graph Connector is something we're going to hear a lot about. Microsoft has a service called Graph Connector, and that's how third-party data gets into Copilot. SharePoint and OneDrive, they're already in there natively, so I mean, they don't need a connector, but everything else does. A connector, a Graph Connector, is the mechanism by which any external content from relational systems, applications like Salesforce, Confluence, file shares, anywhere, becomes visible in Copilot. And Nexus has a purpose-built Graph Connector for our global file system, CloudFS. Nexus is software, obviously, deploys as a VM on the same LAN as a CloudFS node, Azure VM or Hyper-V, your choice, 16 CPU cores, 64 gigs of memory, 4 terabytes of local disk, that's the footprint. And it's very similar to provisioning any enterprise software appliance, so it's going to feel familiar. And then once it's running, 3 plugins to configure: a storage plugin for CloudFS, reading data over SMB, subscribing to audit events, so you can get the change propagation. Nexus will know about that in near real time. There's an AI system plugin which connects to Copilot through the Graph Connector. That's the official Microsoft supported method to bring external data into the index. And then there's an identity plugin that connects your on-prem AD with Entra. And once those are configured, you define policies, what data is to be ingested, what isn't, by type, by path, by date modification, by regular expression, if you wish. And you can run that policy in a simulation mode or a dry run mode to see what it would select. And if that looks good, you can activate. And then Nexus will start ingesting, and Copilot will start returning answers to your prompts.
Right. So on the policy piece, you activate it when you're happy, basically. So how expressive is it? I expect a lot of people on this call have complex file systems. They want to know how they can scope this very, very carefully. What do you think, Mike?
It's pretty expressive. So let's say you're an architect. You want to ingest active project folders, but not the archive, and not marketing, and not HR, and not legal, and not finance, right? And no home directories, let's say. So you could write a policy that could attach to those locations, and you could filter the file types you cared about, and filter out those that you didn't. You could exclude files over certain sizes, because it's usually big binary files, things like that Copilot can't really work with anyway. And you might want to do time-based restriction as well. You can layer that if you want to exclude, say, last modified or user rules later. If you wanted to exclude a particular system account, you could do that as well. That policy UI is one page of config. You can hit dry run. A report will be returned, and you can see what the consequence of that would be without actually doing ingesting. So if the scope is wrong, you can iterate. If you're good with it, you activate. And Nexus handles everything else from that point forward, including any new files introduced that match your policy, any permission changes on already indexed files, and file removal when a file gets deleted on source.
Oh, so it really is that easy. I mean, that sounds way too simple. Can you do me a favor, Mike? And can you peel back the covers a little and tell me what's actually hard about this?
Yeah, the identity mapping is hard. Every file on CloudFS obviously has an NTFS ACL. Every user, every artifact in Copilot has an Entra ID object. These two worlds don't natively talk to each other. So Nexus does a mapping. It reads the CloudFS ACL and maps it to the appropriate Entra ID entity, and enforces that mapping for every Copilot query. So if a user asks a question, if they prompt in Copilot, Copilot will work with Nexus against the underlying data, and we'll check to see if this user had access to the original data on CloudFS. If the answer is yes, then that text is returned, or if you like, that knowledge is returned through Copilot. If not, there won't be a warning, there won't be an error. That knowledge simply won't be returned by the prompt. And that's the piece that makes this defensible in a regulated environment. The second difficult aspect is the change velocity. So file systems are live, right? They're not static. Users are creating and modifying and moving and deleting files all the time, and they change permissions. They change locations. Most graph connectors are crawl-based, so they ingest on a schedule, which means you have this window, time window, right? So the permissions in Copilot can be hours or days out of date with respect to a crawler. So if someone's taken off a project, or maybe they're dismissed, whatever, Copilot might still serve that data for a while, and that's unacceptable. Well, in a lot of industries and probably everywhere. So we built an event-driven ingestion mechanism from the start. CloudFS audit events are captured in real time, and Nexus picks up those changes, those updates within seconds.
So let me recap. So we're focused on identity mapping, user permissions to access a file, and change velocity, basically. So it's not a scan once a night and hope for the best type of solution, right, Mike?
Yeah, so every file event, every change, I mean, that's an event, right? Metadata, content, every event gets pushed. And the architectural difference is that this will work in regulated industries, right? And it's the difference a customer is going to feel when a compliance team runs an audit, for sure.
So what about scale? How big does this actually go?
The customers we've been working with for the beta program, they're in the hundreds of terabytes to low petabytes. We've ingested millions of files with nothing, no aspect of the architecture straining. The CloudFS to Nexus path is land speed over SMB, and the Nexus to Copilot path is Graph Connector API, which Microsoft handles, and we can go as fast as Copilot's indexing infrastructure can accept the data.
So what does the deployment life cycle itself look like over time, Mike? So what I'm getting at is day 30, day 90, what's happening operationally?
So first week, day 1 to 5, if you like, initial ingestion. This is all depending on the data set. So I would call that out. Very large data sets will take longer to ingest. Smaller data sets, obviously less time. But the great thing is using the policy configuration, you can be highly selective about what data you bring in. So customers who want a crawl, walk, run approach, it's ideal for that. So yeah, I mean, initial ingestion, anywhere from a few hours to days. Nexus is reading files over SMB, pushing them through to Copilot using Graph, and you can obviously watch that progress in real time in the dashboard. Week 2 to week 4, pretty much steady state. Your users are using Copilot. They're getting CloudFS sourced knowledge back from their prompts, and Nexus is ticking over in the background, handling all those change events that we mentioned earlier. There's really nothing more for an admin to do on a day-to-day basis, so that's pretty important. And then month 3 and beyond, you might be adding a second policy or expanding the scope of the initial policy, because really once users see what's possible, they're going to want to do more. And that's a good problem to have, right? Driving that Copilot adoption is one of the key benefits of this technology. And you just edit the policy, run that dry mode, as we mentioned, check the results. If good, activate. There's no downtime, no re-ingestion of what's already there.
Outstanding. So a lot of the initial ingestion, just to recap, depends on how much CloudFS data you actually choose to ingest. We'll get to that shortly, by the way. But first, let's jump into the user experience itself. What does an end user actually see?
Well, nothing other than Copilot. And they're familiar with that, right? So they log into 365, they open Copilot using the Nexus connector. They ask a question as they would with Copilot. And if that knowledge exists in the data that's been ingested from CloudFS, they're going to get an answer to their prompt. Nexus isn't really something that an end user will see. There's no UI, no new UI, right? They don't have to learn a new tool. That's the whole point. So the change management burden for your end users is effectively zero, because that's obviously one of the most expensive parts of an enterprise software rollout.
So I want to move into the security side of things, Mike. This is where I hear the most pushback from customers. So one of the first objections that I hear from a security team, for an example, is, hey, we don't have Trust AI with our files. How does that conversation go differently with Nexus in the room?
It's different because we don't ask the customer to trust AI with anything. Your permissions today are in AD and CloudFS, right? That's the source of truth, as is the data, right? If you think there's a primary source of security truth and there's a primary source of data truth, Nexus doesn't replace them. It doesn't rebuild them. It doesn't modify them. Doesn't ask you to redo them. It simply reads and enforces them. And that's pretty important. So the security conversation that we want to have with the CISO is we're agreeing that your existing access control model is that source of truth. And Nexus makes Copilot respect the same model. So if your HR rules say, Darrin, you can see this and you can't see that, right? Then that's what Copilot sees when you're using it. If my access rights were different, then I'm going to see something different when I'm using Copilot, right? So it's on a per user basis. So if you change those rules, Copilot reflects the change. If a user leaves the company, gets disabled in AD, Copilot forgets them. So it's the same model, it's extended. So there's not a lot of things for the CISO to think about.
Okay. So what about the data itself? What actually flows into Copilot?
Only what you've selected. So only what you've told Nexus to ingest. And that's those policies we spoke about earlier. They define that. So the scope you can control by extension, by document type. You can scope by location, which is path. So maybe legal, but not engineering, right? That kind of thing. And of course, all the file system attributes are available for policy discrimination, size, date, all of those sorts of things. Even regular expressions, as I mentioned earlier. And as far as the data that goes into Copilot, we send the text file content and the metadata, not the structure, not binary objects, nothing like that. Your security information, that all stays local. Copilot gets the text that it can search, right? That it can reason. And the security model, is implemented from your infrastructure, from your CloudFS environment that gets mapped to Entra, and that's enforced on the Copilot side.
Okay. So at one point earlier, you'd mentioned dry run mode. What does that actually do, Mike?
Yeah, dry run is just simulation, if you think about it that way, right? So the policy is defining the scope of what data is going to be ingested, and dry run mode executes that without performing any ingestion. So you get a full report of what would happen, what would be ingested to Copilot, right? Every file. You review that. If it's incorrect, then you can adjust the policy. If it looks right, you can activate the policy and be off and running. What you don't want is a customer to find out post-activation that their policy was too broad or too narrow for the use case they're trying to support.
I love the fact that we simulated policy without actually ingesting the data, including reporting for the customer. So Mike, let's say somebody changes a permission, as an example. How fast does Copilot know this?
Well, it's seconds. So, CloudFS obviously produces an audit log, and so it admits that change the moment it happens. We have a native plugin for CloudFS, so we pick that up immediately. and we affect any change that's required. So we push those updates into Copilot. There are crawl-based connectors, that advertise near real time, but that could mean 24 hours, depending on, the time it takes for the crawler to, crawl the file system. We mean seconds when we talk about that, frequency, and that distinction is the whole product, honestly.
So speaking of security, Mike, what about the audit trails? So because eventually someone's going to ask, prove to me that this person couldn't have seen that file through Copilot on such and such a date. How can we disprove that?
Well, Nexus keeps a full record of ingest activity. Every file that was ingested, the appropriate ACLs, every change event that was processed. So you can pull that as a report. The dashboard gives you timeline views, by policy and file type and user. If you're in an industry where you need to prove that a departing employee can't keep accessing data through AI, even if they've after they've been offboarded, that's one event flow in the system. They get disabled in AD, the event propagates, and Copilot stops returning those results.
All right. So obviously it's very important to disable that departed employee's access via AI after they left. With that in mind, let's focus on the CISO conversation itself. What's different about it when Nexus is on the table versus, say, a data lake-based AI approach?
Yeah, it's a good question. Data lake approach, obviously, it's a different approach. Typically involves copying the data, the enterprise data, out of a file system into a new storage layer where the AI tooling runs. And that layer has got its own access control, which means you now have two security domains. You've got two access control methods, the original one, on your file system, and then the new one that you made on the data lake. And, they're not natively integrated. They don't talk to each other. So you get something called permission drift, as you'd expect. And that's something that would keep a CISO up at night, I think. With Nexus, the philosophy is different, right? We treat the file system access control as the only one that matters. We don't create a copy of data with new permissions. We don't build some parallel identity system. We read your permissions, we translate them, we enforce them. And the conversation with the CISO then becomes simpler as a result of that. You don't have to trust a new security model. You just have to trust that we've correctly implemented the one that you already have. And that's a much easier conversation. And it's a lot more auditable.
Here's a question for our audience, Mike, from an architecture firm. They're asking, what about file types Copilot can't natively understand? They said we have tens of thousands of design files. Does Nexus do anything useful there, or are those just invisible?
It's a good question. And the short answer is Nexus does help there. The longer answer is for binary formats like D, WG, Revit. The content isn't textually readable in a way that Copilot can reason about directly, but the metadata is valuable. Project numbers, discipline, revision, issue date, drawn by, labels, things like that. Nexus indexes that. So when your project manager asks Copilot, what's the latest revision of the structural drawings for the Dallas hospital job, something like this, Copilot can answer that because it has the knowledge, it has that metadata in the index. Can't describe what's on the sheet, can't read the binary artifact, but it can find the sheet. And in a lot of workflows, finding that is the whole problem. Finding that data is the problem. And we're watching Microsoft's native CAD support evolve. And as it gets better, then Nexus will get better with it because we're plugged into the same pipeline and integrated with that same ecosystem.
So Mike, great answer. So what you're really emphasizing, what I'm hearing, is the real importance of metadata. We've been in pre-production with customers for a few months now. What are they actually doing with this?
Well, it's a good question. And, a handful of patterns have emerged. The most common one is precedent search. So an architect or an engineer starting a new project, they want to know, really, have we done anything like this before? A year ago, that question got answered by asking folks on the team, a senior person, hey, do you remember if we've ever done a job like this with this structural challenge, whatever, and then emailing around for files. Today, that question gets typed into Copilot as a prompt, and the answer comes back with the relevant project files and a summary, in about 10 to 30 seconds. So, the second pattern, a proposal response. So firms that respond to RFPs, they've got many proposals, lots of them, right? Scattered across project folders. Nexus surfaces that knowledge. So teams that were writing a new project proposal language from scratch, they can now pull winning language from jobs they did years ago. So proposal effort is going down. That's not what we designed it for, but that's what customers are showing us. And they're showing that this is what the tool's good for. The third pattern that we've observed from field teams, someone is on a job site, they have a question, they open Copilot, they ask about a spec sheets, drawings, change orders, they get an answer. And that's been huge for firms with distributed operations and a lot of staff out in the field.
So great, Mike. So I love the fact that our customers can ask Copilot about their data from the remote job sites themselves. You had mentioned the pilot and the beta program, right? So who have we been piloting the solution with?
Predominantly in the AEC space, which includes most, of those that have been in the program. The patterns that I just described, it's what they've been telling us. Each of them is ingesting in the millions of files, surfacing insights that were honestly, effectively, and practically invisible before.
So this is the GA launch, right, that we're talking about. But it's day one or something much bigger. Where does this go from here?
We've architected Nexus as a platform, not a single integration. And what we've shipped is, a series of plugins. The first plugin is CloudFS, of course, to Copilot, but we have an extensible platform. So you can expect more file system support, more AI targets, and then on the AI side, more than just conversational search. So one of the most interesting things in the near term, I think, is Copilot Foundry. Our customers are starting to experiment with agentic pipelines, project intelligent agents, review agents, knowledge management agents. These agents, they need a trusted knowledge source, right? This is key. And Nexus ingested data is that knowledge source. So it's already permission aware, it's already governed, it's already event aware. The same pipeline that powers conversational search today, that's the foundation for agentic workflows tomorrow.
Outstanding. So if you don't mind, say a word about the Microsoft relationship itself. I think that relationship is important content people definitely want to understand.
Yeah, so we're a Microsoft co-sell partner. Nexus will be available through the commercial Microsoft Marketplace. The practical meaning of that is that we're building on first-party Microsoft API with Microsoft's awareness and support. That's key. This is not some reverse engineered integration. So if and when Microsoft evolves the Graph Connector framework, Nexus evolves with it. And, our roadmap is pretty tightly coupled to theirs in a way that it needs to be. For customers running CloudFS in Azure, that coupling matters even more, right? The entire data path from Azure hosted CloudFS through to Nexus into Copilot, it all runs inside your tenant, runs inside the Azure cloud. So there's no third-party infrastructure, there's no egress, there's no new data custody. That's the cleanest architectural story, in my opinion, for a Microsoft committed enterprise.
So well put, Mike. What should our CloudFS customers be thinking about right now?
Three things, I think. One, if you have CloudFS and you already have Copilot, you can turn this on today. So talk to your account team. Most customers are in production within about a week, I'd say. Two, if you're thinking about Foundry agents for your business, then start with Nexus. Those agents are built on a permission-aware real-time pipeline. They're fundamentally better than agents built on scheduled crawls. So you want to make sure you build on the right foundation there. And then 3, if you are a CloudFS customer and you haven't committed to Copilot yet, it's worth revisiting that conversation. I think the math changes when Copilot can actually see your most valuable corporate data, and perhaps an ROI argument that didn't work before, it might work now.
Mike, Darrin, we've reached the end of our time today. Thank you to both of you. If you're watching this and you're a CloudFS customer with Copilot licenses, here's what to do next. Contact your customer success manager. They can walk you through the fit for your current environment and set you up with a deeper conversation with Mike's team. If you're new to Panzura, visit panzura.com/demo. Someone will get back to you right away. A few housekeeping items. This webinar was recorded. You'll get a link to the replay by end of day tomorrow. If your question did not get answered, we'll follow up via email. Your questions are important to us. Thanks for giving us your time today. This concludes our webinar.